Đâu là cách tuyệt vời nhất để con luôn tự tin vào chính mình?
Xin chào quý vị phụ huynh đang theo dõi chương trình talk show Vườn Nhà Có Cây của Apollo English Việt Nam. Quý vị thân mến, đây là một chương trình mà chúng tôi sẽ cùng trò chuyện với quý vị để làm thế nào chúng ta có thể chia sẻ với nhau những kiến thức hữu ích trong việc nuôi dạy con. Cũng giống như là ươm mầm những mầm xanh trong khu vườn Apollo, một đứa trẻ xứng đáng được đón nhận những tia nắng ấm áp cũng như là một cách chăm sóc hợp lý để có thể lớn lên một cách khỏe mạnh và tỏa sáng. Ngày hôm nay, người cùng trò chuyện và mang đến cho chúng ta những thông tin hữu ích sẽ là một thầy giáo của Apollo English Việt Nam. Xin trân trọng giới thiệu thầy Alex Woods, giám đốc học vụ của Apollo English Việt Nam. Hi, Teacher Alex.
Hi, Mai. I want to say thank you for inviting me on this program today. I'm very thankful to be here and to talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, right? I also wanted to say welcome and thank you for watching to all the parents watching at home.
Okay, so Teacher Alex, to start with something a lot of parents quietly feel but rarely say out loud. I want to start our conversation today with unspoken pressure of Vietnamese students that a good child looks a certain way, studies certain subjects, hits certain milestone on a certain timeline. But what if our child doesn't fit that picture? So do you think where that pressure actually comes from?
Well, the pressure comes from a very understandable place, right? We've looked at the history. If you look at the history of Vietnam, right, it is a history of survival, right? And that sort of conformity and adapting to societal standards allowed Vietnam to survive through the challenges, right, through the history of wars and conflict that they had. It's a natural thing for Vietnamese people to be used to conforming to those sort of societal standards, right? And it sort of has gotten passed down from generation to generation. But the children that are growing up in Vietnam now, they're being exposed to a world that is global, open-minded, and very different than the world of the past, right? And that's something that we really need to consider, right?
So the old instinct was to standardize, but the context now has changed and the approach needs to catch up.
Exactly. And that's not a criticism of any prior generation of parents, right? It's just an honest look at where we are now. A clear identity is crucial for three main reasons. It acts as an internal compass. It allows you to not be distracted or swayed from your values one way or another. You know what you want, and you're able to focus on that without following trends or picking up the opinions of others. It also builds resilience against failure or criticism, because if you know who you are and what you represent, then you'll be able to withstand any sort of societal pressure that may come up, right? And finally, it allows you to set effective boundaries. You have that identity, then you'll know when to say no and allow yourself the time and space to exist as an individual.
I think that is exactly why we are here today for this episode. Identity, not identity as in making our child stand out, but identity as a form of immunity, so that when the pressure of comparison hits, and it will, our child doesn't crumble. I have a special thing on this table now, and I think it can tell our story better than any theory could. And we will open it together at the end of our show today. Let's get into it. To warm things up, I have some questions for you and honestly for our parents watching this podcast too. There are no tricks questions, but the answer might surprise you. The first question is, when a child displays personality traits, interests, or viewpoints that are completely different from or even clash with the majority of their peers, how should parents define this? A psychological rebellion of puberty that needs to be corrected immediately so the child can fit in. B, a lack of life skills, which could easily lead to the child being isolated from the collective. C, early signals of individual identity, the capacity of define oneself so as not to be dissolved by crowd standards. So, what is your question? Okay, so what is your answer?
I'm going to go with C, but A and B are completely understandable reactions. If I was a parent and my child all of a sudden started to act differently, I would be worried too. Here's the key. That's not what the educational science actually says. It's not rebellion or defiance. It's a student asking, who am I and what do I bring to the table? That's not defiance. That's a student discovering who they are.
The second question is, what is the most common misconceptions parents have when trying to help their child shape their individual identity in a modern environment? A. Giving the child absolute freedom without providing any guidance or boundaries. B. Confusing excellence with individual identity, thinking that as long as a child is well-rounded and excels at everything, they have established an identity. C. Thinking that identity is fixed, that however a child is born, they must stay exactly that way as they grown up. What is your answer?
B, and I think this hits home for a lot of families. Families pour everything into their children, whether it be extra classes, certificates, tutoring, all those sorts of things, right? And they expect really good results. What happens if you take all of that away? What if you take away the awards, the accolades, the achievements? What are you left with? Because capability, individuality are not the same thing, right? And we need to remember that building an individual identity is not always synonymous with having a high ability.
Theory and concepts are one thing, but I know that what parents actually need is someone to sit down with them and work through the real stuff. So for the segment, we have collected some real situations the parents have written in to share with us today. And I'm going to hand this straight to you. Okay, situation number 1. A mother write in and tell us, our daughter came home from school looking completely crushed. She burst into tears and say her classmates has been calling her a tomboy and a weak creature because she has a tan skin and an athletic build instead of being fair-skinned and delicate like the other girls. As a parent, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to dismiss what she was feeling, but I also didn't want her to think there was actually something wrong with her. So what should I have done in this moment, teacher?
Well, first, I want to say something directly to the mother. You've already done the most important thing, and that means more to her than anything else. Now, on to the situation itself. The first impulse might be to say, oh, you're beautiful, don't listen to the other people, right? But maybe that actually misses the mark a little bit. What the daughter really wants is to be heard.
So you think the first move isn't actually about beauty at all?
The first move is to gently open up the world for her. Show her some examples that the world doesn't conform to this beauty standard either. You can take a Western example like Naomi Campbell, or something that sits closer to home like Miss Hian, right? Those are two superstars that have
beauty queen?
Beauty queens, some of the most beautiful women in the world, right? And they have tan skin and athletic builds and all those sorts of things, right? So first, you can make her recognize that it's okay not to fit in that mold, right? Her classmates haven't even seen the world yet, right? And once you're able to instill that sort of identity in her, she will be able to understand the world beyond the constraints of her society and certain societal standards.
So in a way, we are turning a wound into a window?
Exactly, right? these parenting moments are perfect for opening that window and healing those wounds in a way that builds her up but doesn't break her down.
The next situation comes from a dad from Ho Chi Minh City named Mình. I think a lot of parents watching this podcast are going to recognize this immediately. He wrote, "My son had an essay assignment and I found out he'd copy a generic, safe response from the internet instead of writing his own thoughts. When I confronted him, he said, 'Dad, writing it my way just get me judged. This way the teachers like it and my classmates don't think I'm weird. I don't know if I should push him to be more original or if he's actually making us smart. Am I wrong to be bothered by this?'"
No, you're not wrong to be bothered by something like this, but I would say try to be considerate in your reaction and think about the fact that there may be two different types of causes at play here.
Two different roots, meaning what exactly?
Well, we need to ask ourselves the question, was his son's original idea actually good? In the first case, the son may have his own voice, which is different than that of the other students or different than the teacher's expectations. And he's either too uncomfortable to use that voice to share his unique perspective, or he doesn't have the skills necessary to write it in the way that he intends, right? In this case, it becomes a skill gap and identity gap, not anything really to be concerned of. And the solution here would be the father sitting down and being patient with his son and guiding him to find his own voice in his writing. If the father is able to do that, then he will give the student both the practical skills necessary for the task and will give him the confidence to speak out as himself.
Okay, so how about this situation when the child's original idea was off base?
Well, then things become very different. It is no longer a problem of identity or skills, right? And in this case, the parent needs to be direct and honest, because having your own identity, it's not a good excuse for being wrong or off base, right? In this case, the student may be using identity as a crux, an excuse because he doesn't understand the material, right? And in this case, the parent needs to speak honestly with the student and guide them towards answering the prompt in an accurate way.
So the mindset shift from our child is own their voice, but own your standard too.
Exactly, right? Just because, being unique and different is not an excuse to also be wrong, right? We want to make sure that our responses are academically sound and that we are answering the question.
Okay, Teacher Alex, now let's dig deep into the root of the matter. This is inevitable that society will naturally form its own standard. But if an individual does not nurture a strong enough personality identity, how exactly will the pressure of this standard affect them, in your opinion?
Well, let's look at some of Vietnam's neighboring countries. I think the data speaks for itself. In China, the pressure to own a house and a car has reduced the marriage rate by 20% in 2024. In Japan, the daily pressures of life have contributed to a declining birth rate and a rapidly aging society, where people over the age of 65 make up almost 30% of the population. And in South Korea, for example, high beauty standards have made the country the plastic surgery capital of the world, right? Something that I've witnessed myself during my time when I lived there. And that kind of pressure has forced South Koreans into a terrible situation where almost 40 people take their own lives each day. What these numbers tell us is that society will inevitably adopt these sort of social standards. But if you don't have enough individuality and individual identity, you may be swept away by them. What you need to do is take time to nurture those sorts of identities, the parts of the culture that fits you. Discard the rest, and don't ever let that social pressure transform who you are in a negative way, right? Parents need to help ensure this as well, right? By nurturing that sort of individuality in their children from childhood all the way to adulthood.
So it means that we can actually see identity or even the lack of it just by watching how a child uses language, right?
Throughout my experience in the classroom, I've learned that the children who struggle the most aren't really struggling with English. They're struggling with a much more fundamental question. Who am I, and is it safe to be myself here? When a child can answer that even partially, then that formation of identity is going to build a lot of confidence.
So for parents at home, what does that actually mean in practice?
It means paying attention to a few dimensions of your child that need to grow together. Who they genuinely are on the inside, what they are actually capable of, and what they feel they want to give to the world. You don't need to make this some sort of complex framework. It's just a habit of really seeing your child. There's lots of research that has been done about branding that also points to the exact same direction, right? Take Apollo as an example. Teachers have known this long before coming to classes. The question for every parent watching is simple. When was the last time you asked your child what they actually think and waited long enough to really hear that answer?
We know what needs to be nurtured. Now let's talk about how. How Apollo actually brings this to life across a child's entire learning journey. I think it's my question too, as a parent, because parents watching this right now are probably thinking that everything we say sounds great in theory, but what does it look like in practice for their child?
I mean, that's exactly the right question to ask. And what I want Apollo parents to understand is that at Apollo, this isn't a workshop or a one-off program. This is a lifelong journey from the moment a child walks in at age 3 all the way to adulthood. Every stage is intentional. So, at the kindy stage, ages 3 to 6, the foundation we're building is belonging and curiosity. And I want to be clear about why we start here. Before any child can develop a sense of who they are, they need to feel safe enough to find out. A child who doesn't feel like they belong won't risk being different. Safety is the soil, and everything else grows from that.
So we can rush to identity if the ground isn't ready?
That's exactly right. And then we look at the primary stage. The focus shifts to resilience and autonomy. This is where children start learning what it actually means to commit, to push through something hard, to own their choices, to be accountable not because someone's watching, but because it matters to them. That internal ownership is critical. It's what separates a child who performs for approval from one who genuinely grows. And then, at the secondary and IELTS stage, we activate voice, personal expression in the fullest sense. By this point, a child who has been nurtured through belonging, resilience, and autonomy is ready to step forward and say, "This is who I am, and this is what I have to offer." That is identity, fully formed and actualized.
In these stages, they are sequential, but I imagine they don't operate in isolation.
Yes, of course. Identity just doesn't automatically turn on at the age of 14. It's a process. It's a process that accumulates quietly over years through thousands of small moments. Every time a teacher says, "I hear your idea," instead of "follow my example." Every time a parent says, "Tell me more about that," instead of "Why can't you be like your classmates?" Those moments are deposits. And a child who arrives at adulthood knowing who they are, that didn't happen by accident. Someone kept making those deposits year after year after year, And that's someone more often than anyone else.
Everything we have talked today about the data, the framework, the real story from our parents, it all keeps coming back to the same truth. Identity isn't something you install in a child, it's something you tend to slowly and over time. And I think what sitting in this box say that more beautifully than anything we have said today. Shall we? Let's see. Thưa các quý vị phụ huynh, trong mỗi tập podcast Vườn Nhà Có Cây thì những người thực hiện chương trình đều mang đến một loài cây có ý nghĩa đặc biệt nào đó. Và trong tập podcast với thông điệp là đứa trẻ biết mình là ai sẽ làm chủ cuộc đời ngày hôm nay, thì chúng tôi mang đến cho quý vị một loài cây vô cùng đặc biệt. Những cái mảnh trầm hương này được kết tinh từ một loài cây rất đặc biệt của núi rừng Việt Nam, đó là cây gió bầu. Khi sinh trưởng bình thường thì cây không có mùi hương, không có gì đặc biệt. Nhưng khi mà thân cây chịu tổn thương, khi giông bão ập đến, nó không hề gục ngã, và từ sâu bên trong thì cây tự tiết ra một chất nhựa để chống chọi, để bao bọc, để tự chữa lành. Và qua nhiều năm tháng, tinh chất nhựa đó kết tinh lên một loài cây với bản thân cái tên đã thấy thơm rồi, đó chính là trầm hương. Thứ hương thơm quý hiếm và độc bản bậc nhất thế giới. Bản sắc của một đứa trẻ cũng vậy, nó giúp con người hình thành bản sắc không phải để con trở nên khác người hay để con nổi bật hơn trong đám đông, mà bản sắc là thứ giúp con không bị mất đi chính bản thân mình, dù cuộc đời có xô đẩy, có thay đổi đến đâu. Và khi con có bản sắc vững vàng, con không cần phải chứng minh bằng. Và khi con có bản sắc vững vàng thì con không cần phải chứng minh bản thân mình bằng cách là trở thành một ai đó khác, mà con sẽ biết mình là ai, biết mình đang đứng ở đâu, và từ đó tự tìm được đúng cái hướng đi của riêng mình. Và chúng ta mong muốn các con đừng biến mình thành một phiên bản xuất sắc theo khuôn mẫu, mà hãy nâng đỡ để con chính là phiên bản tốt nhất của chính mình. Thank you very much for sharing such meaningful thoughts in our podcast today. And at the end of our conversation, do you have something to say with the parents?
I just want to say to them that it's a journey, right? Take the time to be thoughtful and consider your child's own identity, right? It won't happen overnight. It will happen over a lifetime.
Okay, take their child times and them also, right?
Of course,
Yeah.
right? We don't expect the parents to be perfect either, right?
Yeah.
No one is.
Quý vị thân mến, chúng ta cũng không hoàn hảo và chúng ta cũng đang trên con đường tìm ra bản ngã và phiên bản tốt nhất của chính mình. Vì vậy, có lẽ là chúng ta sẽ cần phải kiên nhẫn hơn một chút để có thể đồng hành cùng con trên con đường mà con tìm ra cái bản sắc của chính mình. Đó cũng là thông điệp mà chúng tôi muốn gửi gắm đến quý vị thông qua tập Vườn Nhà Có Cây ngày hôm nay. Cảm ơn quý vị đã quan tâm theo dõi và xin chào. Hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong những tập podcast lần sau.
Không có một công thức chung cho mọi học sinh, chỉ có lộ trình phù hợp với từng con. Bắt đầu ngay hành trình học đúng cách, đúng nhịp, đúng gu, cùng Anh ngữ Donny đóng giày. Đăng ký ngay.